When Jungkook answers RM's question about his family on the podcast, everyone is left in shock. A shocking truth is revealed, and nothing will ever be the same. Hyung. There's something I've never told anyone before. Jungkook's voice was steady, but his eyes burned with an intensity that made RM pause. It wasn't just nervousness. It was something deeper, something urgent. The air inside the dimly lit podcast studio felt heavier, thick with anticipation. RM leaned in slightly, his curiosity piqued. What do you mean? The silence that followed was deafening. Even the crew members behind the cameras stopped moving, holding their breath as Jungkook exhaled slowly. Then he finally spoke, his words sending chills down everyone's spine. My family isn't who you think they are. The air inside the studio was suffocatingly still. RM blinked, processing Jungkook's words. My family isn't who you think they are. A nervous chuckle escaped RM's lips. Wait, what do you mean? Are you saying? Jungkook didn't smile. He didn't laugh. His fingers tapped against the table, a subtle but restless rhythm. I mean exactly what I said, Hyung. His voice was lower now, measured, as if he was weighing every word before letting it slip. My family has been keeping a secret for years, and I think it's time I finally talk about it. Behind the cameras, the crew exchanged uneasy glances. The podcast was meant to be lighthearted music, life, funny memories. Not whatever this was. RM cleared his throat. He was known for handling conversations smoothly, but something about Jungkook's tone made his chest tighten. All right, RM said carefully, adjusting the mic. If you're serious, let's talk about it. But Jungkook, are you sure you want to do this here? Right now? Jungkook inhaled deeply, his jaw tightening for just a moment. Then he looked straight into RM's eyes. There's no better time, Hyung. And once I say it, there's no going back. The tension in the room became unbearable. Okay, RM said, his voice steady but his hands slightly gripping the edge of the table. Tell me. Jungkook exhaled, closing his eyes briefly before speaking. My family has been living under a different identity for as long as I can remember. And the truth is, suddenly, the studio door slammed open. A crew member rushed inside, panic all over his face. Stop the recording, he shouted. Right now. RM's eyes widened. Jungkook turned to face the crew member, his expression unreadable. But before anyone could react, a deep voice echoed from the doorway. You shouldn't be talking about this, Jungkook. And just like that, the temperature in the room dropped. Silence. The crew froze. The air inside the studio, already heavy with tension, felt suffocating. RM's fingers twitched near his mic, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Jungkook, however, didn't move. His face remained unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. The man standing at the door was tall, dressed in black from head to toe. His voice had been calm, but the weight of his presence sent chills through the room. You shouldn't be talking about this, Jungkook, the man repeated, stepping forward. His eyes, sharp and cold, locked onto Jungkook's like a silent warning. RM instinctively sat up straighter. Who are you? His voice was firm, but there was an unmistakable edge of caution. The man ignored him. Instead, he turned his gaze back to Jungkook, who still hadn't spoken. Jungkook, the man said again, softer this time. You know this isn't safe. RM's stomach tightened. Safe? What was unsafe about talking about family? Jungkook finally exhaled and leaned back in his chair. So, they sent you? The man didn't answer. RM's patience snapped. What the hell is going on? He looked between Jungkook and the stranger, waiting, demanding an explanation. Jungkook rubbed his temples before finally meeting RM's gaze. His expression was unreadable, but his voice was steady. Hyung, I told you. My family isn't who you think they are. And what does that mean? RM pushed. Jungkook hesitated, then turned to the man. Let me tell him. The man's jaw clenched. You know that's not an option. Jungkook's eyes darkened. I'm done hiding. For the first time, a crack appeared in the stranger's stoic expression. His gaze flickered to the cameras still rolling, then back to Jungkook. "If you say another word," the man said, voice dangerously low, "you'll put everyone in this room at risk." A chill ran down RM's spine. This wasn't just family drama. This was something else, something far bigger. The room felt like it was closing in, the weight of an unspoken truth pressing down on everyone inside. Jungkook's fingers curled into fists. He took a deep breath as if preparing for battle. Then he looked straight at RM. "Hyung, my real last name isn't John." The studio erupted into chaos. "Hyung, my real last name isn't John." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. RM's breath caught in his throat. The crew gasped. The cameras were still rolling, but no one cared anymore. The man in black stiffened, his eyes flashing with warning. RM forced himself to speak. "Jungkook, what are you saying?" Jungkook's jaw tightened. "I mean exactly that. John Jungkook? That's not who I really am." The man in black took a step forward, his presence radiating danger. "That's enough." But Jungkook didn't stop. He turned to RM, his voice shaking, not with fear, but with the weight of the truth he had carried for years. "My real last name, it was erased." RM's mind raced. "Erased? What do you?" Before he could finish, the man in black moved. In one swift motion, he reached for Jungkook's arm. Jungkook anticipated it. He reacted instantly, twisting out of reach and shoving his chair back with a screech. His muscles tensed, body shifting into a defensive stance RM had never seen before. The stranger stopped, studied him. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he muttered, "So, they trained you after all." RM's pulse spiked. "They? Trained?" Jungkook took a slow breath, then spoke carefully. "I think it's time you leave." The man's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you're doing." "Ido." RM watched the silent battle between them, his mind struggling to catch up. Jungkook's real name was erased. He had been trained. And now, a man who clearly wasn't just an ordinary messenger, was here to shut him up. Something was very, very wrong. The man in black exhaled sharply. Then, to RM's shock, he pulled out a phone, dialed a number, and pressed it to his ear. "He's talking," the man said. "We have a problem." Jungkook's entire body went rigid. RM felt the blood drain from his face. Whoever was on the other end of that call wasn't just watching. They were listening, and they were coming. The podcast studio, once filled with casual laughter and lighthearted conversations, now felt like a battlefield. The air was thick with tension as Jungkook stood frozen, his muscles coiled tight like a predator sensing danger. RM could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The man in black held the phone to his ear, his face unreadable. "He's talking. We have a problem." Those words sent a chill down RM's spine. Jungkook's fists clenched at his sides. His breath was slow, controlled, but RM knew his friend too well. Jungkook wasn't just nervous. He was calculating. The man in black listened for a few more seconds, then ended the call. He exhaled and slid the phone back into his coat pocket. Then he looked at Jungkook. "They're on their way." RM felt the air get sucked out of the room. Who was coming? And why did it sound like Jungkook was in serious danger? Jungkook finally moved. He grabbed RM's wrist, tight enough to make RM flinch. "Hyung." Jungkook's voice was low but firm. "We need to leave. Now." RM looked at him, then at the man in black. "What the hell is going on?" Jungkook didn't answer. Instead, he turned to the stunned podcast crew. "Delete the footage." The head producer hesitated. "But, delete it." Jungkook's voice was sharp, final. The kind of voice that left no room for argument. The producer scrambled to shut everything down, his hands shaking as he reached for the controls. RM swallowed hard. He had been friends with Jungkook for years, had seen every side of him. From the golden magne of BTS to the introspective artist he had become. But this was someone else entirely. Jungkook pulled him toward the back exit. "Hyung, please. I'll explain everything. but we can't be here when they arrive. RM hesitated. Jungkook, if you're in danger, we need to call someone. There's no one to call. Jungkook cut him off. His voice was raw. This is bigger than you think. The back door burst open. A second man stepped inside, dressed in black like the first, but older, his face lined with experience. His gaze locked onto Jungkook immediately. Stand down. His voice was commanding, as if he expected Jungkook to obey without question. Jungkook didn't move. RM saw it then, the way Jungkook shifted his weight, the way his breathing slowed. This wasn't fear. This was preparedness. The second man's eyes narrowed. Don't make this harder than it already is. Jungkook exhaled. It was never going to be easy. Then, in one explosive motion, Jungkook attacked. The moment Jungkook moved, RM barely had time to react. In a blur of speed, Jungkook launched himself at the second man, his movements precise, controlled, trained. The man in black barely had time to raise his arms before Jungkook struck. A sharp elbow to the ribs that sent him stumbling backward. But he recovered fast. Too fast. He wasn't just some bodyguard. He knew how to fight. The first man lunged forward, aiming for Jungkook's shoulder. But Jungkook twisted out of reach, sweeping his leg under him in a swift counterattack. The man hit the floor with a dull thud, groaning in pain. RM could only stare, stunned. This was Jungkook. The same Jungkook who laughed too easily, who played with Bam like a kid, who wrote songs about love and freedom. But this Jungkook, the one in front of him now, moved like a ghost. Silent, deadly, precise. Who the hell are you? Jungkook? The second man, the older one, didn't waste time. He stepped forward, throwing a calculated punch. Jungkook dodged, barely. But RM saw it, the slight hesitation, the flicker of recognition in Jungkook's eyes. This wasn't just an enemy. This was someone Jungkook knew. Enough! The man snapped, his voice ice cold. You've already said too much. Jungkook didn't lower his guard. His breathing was steady, his body still coiled like a spring. Who are they? RM finally found his voice, stepping forward despite the chaos. What do they want from you? Jungkook didn't answer. Instead, his gaze stayed locked on the older man. They sent you? Jungkook's voice was almost betrayed. The man sighed, brushing dust off his coat. You left us no choice. RM's stomach twisted. This wasn't random. This was connected to whatever Jungkook had been trying to reveal. The first man groaned, pushing himself off the floor, while the second man pulled out a phone. They're here. His voice was quiet, but the warning was clear. Outside, the faint sound of tires screeching filled the air. More were coming. Jungkook's jaw clenched. He turned to RM, eyes dark and full of something RM couldn't name. Hyung, Jungkook said, his voice lower now, almost pleading. If you trust me, we have to run. RM had so many questions. His mind was screaming for answers. But one look at Jungkook, his eyes, his desperation, and RM made his choice. Let's go. Jungkook grabbed RM's wrist and bolted for the door. Behind them, the second man spoke into his phone, his voice calm. They're escaping. Then he smirked. Just like we trained him to. The night air was thick with tension as Jungkook and RM sprinted down the dimly lit alleyway, their footsteps echoing against the concrete. The city was alive, but in this moment it felt empty. Like the world had shrunk down to just the two of them and the people chasing them. RM's lungs burned, his mind racing. None of this made sense. Who were those men? What did Jungkook mean when he said his family's name was erased? And why the hell was Jungkook fighting like someone who had been trained for war? A black SUV screeched onto the street behind them, tires skidding as the headlights bathed them in an eerie glow. Faster, Hyung! Jungkook shouted, gripping RM's wrist as he yanked him into another alley. A gunshot rang out. RM flinched as a bullet pinged against a metal dumpster nearby. His heart slammed against his ribs. Are they shooting at us? He gasped. They're trying to slow us down, Jungkook muttered. His eyes darted around, calculating. They reached a dead end. RM turned, panic rising. The SUV had stopped at the alley's entrance, its doors flying open. 3 more men in black stepped out. Trapped, Jungkook pulled RM behind him, his stance shifting, ready to fight. RM had seen Jungkook box before, had even trained with him. But this was something else. One of the men took a step forward. "Come quietly, Jungkook." Jungkook exhaled sharply. "Not happening." The man sighed. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Then stop chasing me." The man chuckled. "You know that's not how this works. You belong to us." RM felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Belong?" Jungkook clenched his fists. "I was never yours." The man smirked. "That's not what your father said." Jungkook froze. RM felt the shift immediately. The tension in Jungkook's body changed, no longer just defensive, but something darker. Something dangerous. The man saw it too. His smirk widened. "Ah, so you still care, don't you?" Jungkook's breathing was slow, measured, but his fingers curled tighter, knuckles turning white. RM didn't understand everything yet, but he knew one thing: this was bad. "Jungkook," RM said carefully, reaching for his friend's arm. "We need a plan." Jungkook didn't respond. The men in black took another step forward. RM's instinct screamed, "Jungkook!" Too late. Jungkook moved, faster than RM had ever seen him. And this time, he wasn't just fighting to escape. He was fighting to end this. Jungkook attacked. He moved with terrifying precision, ducking low, striking fast. The first man barely had time to react before Jungkook's fist crashed into his jaw, sending him stumbling backward. RM barely had time to process what was happening before the second man lunged forward. Jungkook anticipated it. He twisted, grabbing the man's arm and slamming him against the alley wall with a force that made RM flinch. The third man pulled something from his jacket, a taser. RM's instincts kicked in. "Jungkook! Watch out!" Jungkook spun just as the taser crackled to life. But before the man could strike, RM did something he never thought he'd do. He punched the guy. It wasn't pretty, and it sure as hell wasn't as smooth as Jungkook's moves, but it was enough. The man staggered, dropping the taser, and Jungkook used the opening to land a brutal kick to his ribs. The alley fell silent except for their heavy breathing. RM stared at his own fist, still clenched. "Did I just?" Jungkook grabbed his wrist. "We don't have time, Hyung. Let's go." They bolted down the alley just as the men groaned, pushing themselves off the ground. "Get the car." One of them hissed. "Now." A name he never wanted to hear again. Jungkook and RM ran until their lungs burned. They cut through back streets, slipping through narrow passageways, always checking over their shoulders. Finally, Jungkook yanked RM into a dark stairwell behind an abandoned building. He pressed a finger to his lips. They waited. The sound of tires screeching passed by. Then silence. Jungkook exhaled. "I think we lost them." RM slid down against the wall, heart still racing. "Can I please get an explanation now?" Jungkook hesitated. He was still on edge, his hands twitching like he was ready to fight again at any second. Then, finally, he sighed and sat down across from RM. "My real name," Jungkook started, voice quiet, "isn't John. He used to be a long time ago, but it was erased when my family disappeared." RM's breath caught. "Disappeared?" Jungkook nodded. "My father made a deal with people he shouldn't have. When things went wrong, they wiped us out of existence. New names, new identities. I was trained to survive, to run, to fight if I had to." RM tried to process it. This wasn't just about a hidden past. This was organized. And worse, Jungkook wasn't just some victim. They had trained him. RM swallowed. "Who are they?" Jungkook's jaw tightened. His voice was barely above a whisper. "A group that doesn't exist. At least not on paper." RM felt his stomach drop. "And they want you back?" Jungkook's eyes darkened. "They don't just want me back." He looked toward the exit, his expression unreadable. "They want to finish what they started." Jungkook's words hung heavy in the air. "They want to finish what they started." RM felt a chill crawl down his spine. What the hell does that mean? Jungkook leaned back against the cold wall of the stairwell, his head tilted upward, eyes distant. Lost in memories he had spent years burying. RM swallowed hard. Jungkook, you're saying these people erased your family? Forced you into a new identity? And now they want you back? Jungkook exhaled sharply. Not just me, Hyung. My father. My mother. My brother. RM blinked. Brother. Jungkook hesitated. A muscle in his jaw twitched. I had an older brother. His voice was quieter now, almost fragile. But he didn't make it out. Silence. RM's heart clenched. He had known Jungkook for years, had seen him at his highest and lowest, but this was something else. He had never spoken about a brother before, and now RM knew why. Jungkook ran a hand through his hair. They were part of something bigger, Hyung. My family wasn't just running a business. They were involved with people who controlled things from the shadows. RM frowned. What kind of things? Jungkook hesitated. Then he finally said it. Governments. Military projects. Technology that wasn't supposed to exist. RM's breath hitched. This isn't just a cover-up. This is conspiracy-level shit. Jungkook let out a bitter chuckle. I was just a kid when it all fell apart. I didn't understand why we had to change our names, why we had to move, why my father kept looking over his shoulder. But now, he clenched his fists. Now I know they were just waiting for the right time to pull me back in. RM shook his head. That's insane. Why would they still be after you? Jungkook's lips pressed into a thin line. Because I'm the last piece of the puzzle. The last person alive who knows the truth about what my family was working on. RM felt his stomach drop. And what exactly were they working on? Jungkook looked away. Something that could change everything. A sharp buzz broke the silence. Jungkook flinched, snapping his head toward the sound. RM watched as Jungkook pulled out his phone, his fingers tightening around the device like he already knew what was coming. One new message. No number. No name. Just a single line of text. We found you. The color drained from RM's face. Jungkook. Jungkook's grip on the phone tightened. His breathing slowed. They're already here. A loud crash echoed from outside the stairwell. Footsteps. Fast. Calculated. Then, a voice. Cold.
Familiar.
Jungkook. You should have stayed hidden. Jungkook's body tensed at the sound of that voice. It wasn't just anyone. It was him. RM felt Jungkook's entire demeanor shift. His breathing slowed, his shoulders squared, and his eyes darkened into something unreadable. The footsteps outside the stairwell grew louder. Then, the door slammed open. A tall figure stepped into the dimly lit stairwell, dressed in a sleek black suit, his presence radiating authority. But it wasn't the suit or the cold stare that sent a chill down RM's spine. It was the resemblance. RM's breath caught. The sharp jawline, the piercing gaze, the way he carried himself like he owned the room. This man, he looked like an older version of Jungkook. Jungkook's fists clenched. His voice was low, controlled, but RM could hear the storm brewing beneath it. Hyung. RM's heart stopped. Hyung. The man smirked. It's been a long time, Jungkook. RM's mind was spinning. Jungkook had said his brother was dead, that he hadn't made it out, but he was standing right here, alive. And from the way he looked at Jungkook, from the way those men had chased them, from the way Jungkook had spent his whole life running, this wasn't a reunion. This was a confrontation. Jungkook took a slow step forward. You're working for them. His brother tilted his head. It's more complicated than that. Jungkook's jaw tightened.
No.
It's not. RM could feel the weight of years between them, of betrayal, of unanswered questions, of wounds that had never healed. His brother exhaled. Jungkook, you need to come with me. They won't stop until you do. Jungkook let out a bitter laugh. You're one of them now, aren't you? His brother's expression didn't change. I did what I had to do to survive. Jungkook's voice dropped, barely above a whisper. And you expect me to do the same? A long pause. Then his brother nodded. Jungkook stared at him, his own flesh and blood, before shaking his head.
No.
His brother sighed. Then you leave me no choice. RM barely had time to react before Jungkook's brother moved. Jungkook blocked the first attack, their movements so fast RM could barely keep up. Fists, elbows, knees. Every hit was precise. Every counterattack brutal. This wasn't just a fight. This was two brothers trying to break each other. Jungkook gritted his teeth. You trained me to fight, but you forgot something. His brother dodged a punch, smirking. And what's that? Jungkook's eyes flashed. I'm not you. Then, with a swift, devastating strike, Jungkook landed a blow that sent his brother crashing to the ground. Panting, Jungkook stepped back. His brother groaned, wiping blood from his mouth. Instead of anger, he looked impressed. You've gotten stronger, he muttered. Jungkook glared down at him. I had to. A tense silence filled the stairwell. Then his brother chuckled. They'll never stop coming, you know? Jungkook's expression hardened. Then I'll make them. RM's breath hitched. What does that mean? Jungkook turned to RM. Hyung, I need you to trust me one last time. RM hesitated. Jungkook, I can't run forever, Jungkook said. This has to end. RM swallowed, his chest tightening. What are you going to do? Jungkook exhaled. I'm going to take them down. His brother smirked from the ground. Now that, I'd like to see. Jungkook didn't smile back, because he wasn't joking. And as RM looked into Jungkook's eyes, he knew this wasn't over. It was just beginning.